The rhetorical situation is all the elements that surround and influence the creation of a text. It's all the stuff that's influencing the writer when they sit down to write or when they stand up to speak. There are 6 elements of the rhetorical situation: the writer, the message, the audience, the context, the exigence, and the purpose. The writer is the person who utters, writes, or sponsors the text. It can be an individual or a group of people. When trying to determine who the writer of a text is, just ask yourself, who is trying to do the persuading? The message is the ideas, topics, themes, people, or events being discussed. It's just whatever the text is about, the thesis of the text, if you will. When trying to understand what the message of a text is, just ask yourself, what is the writer trying to tell the audience? The audience is the person or persons to whom the persuasion is directed. It can be a single individual, a group of people, or a body like a company, industry, or government. It can also be a certain type of person as well. When you're trying to identify the audience of a text, ask yourself, who is the speaker trying to persuade? And remember, it may be multiple audiences that the speaker is trying to reach. The context is the time and place in which a text is created. It's also the important issues, the social climate, the common attitudes or beliefs that are prevalent during that time and in that place. When trying to identify the context, ask yourself, when and where is the persuasion taking place? And also, what's going on here at this time? The first 4 elements of the rhetorical situation are often depicted using a model called the Aristotelian Triangle. Here we see that the Aristotelian triangle is really 2 shapes, a triangle and a circle. The writer, message, and audience make up the 3 lines of the perimeter of the triangle, and then the context is represented by a circle around the triangle. Note that on such a shape, all of the elements intersect with one another. That's because who the writer is affects what their message will be, and who the audience is also affects what the writer's message will be. Who the audience is also affects who the writer presents themselves to be. Also, the context, the time and place the text is written, that affects all of those things. Let's take a look at an example of a famous text. We'll look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Who would you say is the speaker? The speaker here is Martin Luther King Jr. We know that he's a minister and civil rights activist, and at the time he was considered a radical and was a wildly unpopular figure in much of America. What would we say is Martin Luther King Jr.'s message? He is saying that the people of the United States must continue to advocate for equal rights and treatment of Black Americans so that the future generations can live in harmony. These were ideas that were considered radical by many at the time. Who would we say is Martin Luther King Jr.'s audience? Here we have to look at multiple audiences because there are people at the Lincoln Memorial watching and listening to him speak, and those people would have been involved in the March on Washington that he was one of the leaders of. But this is also being broadcast across America. So others in his audience would include people across America who are satisfied with the way society is, people who maybe believe that Black people should not advance in society, or those who believe nothing can change. To understand this larger broadcast audience, we have to understand that many white Americans at this time were anxious about living and working closely with Black people. And they'd been raised to believe that Black people were inferior, and much of American society at this time reinforced this belief. What would we say is his context? Well, we know the time and place. This was August 28th, 1963, and he was speaking at the Lincoln Memorial, which is in Washington, D.C., here in the United States. We also know that at this time, this was the height of the civil rights movement, and we also had a lot of the racial tensions and conflict that I described previously. Let's take a look at another example, this time a visual text. This is a gun violence ad. Who would we say is the speaker? To know who the speaker is, we have to kind of look around the ad, and down in the lower right corner, we see that it's sponsored by a group named Moms Demand Action. And doing a little bit of research, we learned that it's a nonprofit gun control advocacy group that was founded in 2012 in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook massacre. We also know that it was originally just a group of mothers who got together to form this nonprofit group. We need to also understand that the speaker of this text is not the artists or the designers who put the ad together. It's certainly not the advertising firm who conceptualized the ad. While all of these groups had a hand in creating the text, they're not the ones who are trying to do the persuading. And so this is an example of how the audience can be someone who merely sponsors the text and maybe didn't have a hand in physically creating it. So what is the ad's message? To fully understand the message here, we have to do a little bit of interpretation. So we have two children here, each holding something. The girl on the right is holding what appears to be an assault rifle. The boy on the left is holding a Kinder Egg, which is a German-made candy that's a chocolate egg that's got a little toy inside of it. And the caption at the top reads, "One child is holding something that's been banned in America to protect them. Guess which one?" So Kinder Eggs, if you're not familiar with those, they were banned back in the 30s because lawmakers decided that the little toy inside posed a choking hazard. Assault weapons, however, have been legal to purchase since 2004 when the assault weapons ban passed in Congress in the 90s was allowed to expire. And since then, AR-15 style guns have become a really big business and have become this major symbol for the right wing. So we could say that the message of this ad is that it is absurd that in the United States we have banned the sale of Kinder Eggs, which pose a very small threat to the public safety, but we have not banned the sale of assault weapons, which pose a serious threat to public safety. Who might we say is the audience for this ad? So this is a text that doesn't have a very specific audience. There's not a live and in-person group like at Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, right? This ad was presumably designed to be disseminated all across the United States, seen on billboards, on television, on bus stations, that sort of thing. So we have to ask ourselves, who is the ad trying to persuade? I think it's trying to persuade people who don't believe America has a gun problem, or people who just outright don't want increased gun control. We also need to keep in mind that the audience is going to be heavily influenced by the work of gun lobby groups. Gun lobby groups have been working for the last couple of decades to push a lot of pro-gun arguments here in the United States and make them widely known to people. Furthermore, many people have been led to believe this modern interpretation of the Second Amendment, the interpretation that the Second Amendment means that there should be no restrictions to gun ownership whatsoever. People have been led to believe that that is the way that the Second Amendment has always been interpreted, which is not correct. That's only something that's been around for the last 25 or 30 years. Lastly, we need to note that the audience may be influenced by this old argument that nothing can stop gun violence except the sale of more guns. So what is the context for this ad? Well, we have to do a little research to find this out, but this ad was published back in 2013. It was just months after the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, and we know that it was widely disseminated here in the United States. What's going on at this time? Well, we need to remember that assault weapons ban was allowed to expire in 2004, leading to many assault weapons coming into the hands of civilians. We also need to know that this is during the time of this very loose interpretation of the Second Amendment by the Supreme Court. And also that America has this very entrenched gun culture that goes all the way back to its revolution. It's time to check for your understanding. In the next exercise, you'll need to identify the writer, message, audience, and context of John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. The last two elements of the rhetorical situation don't have positions on the Aristotelian Triangle, and that's because they're largely products of multiple elements within the situation. However, exigence and purpose are just as important as the other four elements we've discussed. The exigence of a text is just whatever inspired or otherwise prompted the writer to persuade. It can be a specific event, a series of events, or merely conditions that the writer finds unacceptable. It can be something that the writer has experienced firsthand or something they've observed from the outside. The purpose is what the writer hopes to accomplish by persuading. It can be some specific action that the writer wants to have happen, or it can be some broader change that the writer seeks to see. When analyzing the exigence and purpose of a text, you can sometimes get them mixed up. And to help with that, think of cause and effect. The exigence causes the purpose. The exigence happens to the writer, or the writer experiences the exigence, and that makes the writer then go out and create the text with the purpose of doing something about the exigence. For instance, if you think of the Batman comics, Batman has an exigence. Batman's exigence is that his parents were killed. As a result of that exigence, Batman has a purpose: to make Gotham safe. What might you say is the exigence of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech? You might say that his exigence is that Black Americans have long been treated as second-class citizens in the United States and have lived in fear of racially motivated violence. You could say that that caused him to deliver his speech. What then is the primary purpose of his speech? Well, if he's responding to that exigence, we could say that his purpose is to encourage the American people to advocate for equal rights and treatment of Black Americans. Note that the purpose here is similar to the message, but it's not the same thing. The message is the idea he's communicating to his audience. The purpose is what he hopes his audience to do when he communicates that full message. What could we say is the exigence of our gun violence ad? We might say that America has experienced numerous mass shootings, and the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre was especially shocking because so many of the victims were little children. In the aftermath of the shooting, the nation was grieving and wondering how such a thing could happen. This seems like the sort of thing that would inspire Moms Demand Action, who published this ad so soon after Sandy Hook, to create the ad. So what might we say is their purpose? We could say that the purpose here is to stir people to promote stricter gun control laws that might prevent future mass shootings and the senseless deaths of innocent people. Time now for another check for understanding. In the next exercise, identify the exigence and purpose of John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity.